Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel. Today's topic is about understanding retain statement. And here I would like to tell a couple of things. I'm not going to talk about automatic retain or the concept of retain and missing values, but what I will be focusing mainly on is retain statement. And now let us also try to understand what retain statement does. It causes a variable that is created either by input statement or by assignment statement to retain its value from one iteration of data step to next. I will explain this in the detail as we move with this topic. Before going into the details of retain statement, it is very important to understand how data step works, especially when we read the data through input statement or through assignment statement. Here we will be capturing mostly about input statement. But first let's look into an example and try to understand how data step works. Here I have a simple data step, and in this data step I have a put statement in here in the beginning, wherein I am doing a put statement for underscore all underscore, means put all the variables in the log or the variable values into the log. And then I have an input statement which reads from these data lines, followed by a format, and this format is just to display the variable value I want. And again I have a put statement wherein I'm again doing underscore all underscore. Here the difference between these two put statements is the first put statement is before the input statement, that is this one. One is after the input statement. And again we have data lines, and here we have written out our data lines what we want, followed by semicolon and run semicolon. Now let us quickly run this data step. These are the results which we see in the data step, and there is nothing spectacular about it. And let's look into the log. In the log, it gives me a lot of information because this is not in a great aligned manner. What I have done is I have copy pasted in here and aligned it in a proper way. Now let us try to understand the whole of this what has been written in the log by looking into this data step. I have a put statement in here. This put statement is before input statement, and I have underscore all underscore. You know that we have only one variable visit underscore dt. But with every data step, you have two automatic variables. The first one is underscore error underscore. The second one is underscore and underscore. Underscore error underscore tells us whether there is an error or not. And underscore and underscore tells us what is the iteration it is in. That is the data step in. Here underscore error underscore is not very important. I'm not going to talk about that much. And in here, first we need to understand this particular row, what it is trying to tell us. Here I said before input statement. Before input statement, as this variable has not been read, it will have a missing value. And this is the first iteration, so underscore and underscore will be 1. And after that, this input statement, what it does is it reads this particular observation and it becomes 07 Jan 2022. And what happens after that is it writes that particular observation to this data set. Once it writes it to this particular data set, our iteration is complete. And what SAS data step does is it makes this particular variable missing again. That is what you can see from here. And because we are in the second iteration, our underscore and underscore will be 2. Because this value again is missing, it will have a missing value in here. Again, after this iteration is done, it again goes to missing. That's what you see in here. And now it is a third iteration. And after the input statement, it reads the third iteration, and this value is read, and you can see underscore and underscore equal to 3, and we have observation. So what happens here is the data step tries to read one more time, and the value of visit date goes to missing. That is in our fourth iteration. But now when it goes to input statement, it understands that there is end of the file marker and there is no more data in here. So what happens in here is it no longer reads the data. The important point to understand in here is at the beginning of each iteration, the value goes to missing, and then data is read and it is written to data step. And again, when the next iteration starts, it goes to missing again, and then it reads the data. So to conclude this, for every new iteration, we have a missing value. What we are looking in here is we want to, or if we want to retain a value from previous iteration, what we could do is we could simply use a retain statement. That is, here the value is missing for the first iteration, and then once the row or observation has been read, you can see a value in here. And when it starts the second iteration, if we use a retain statement, what it does is it retains this value to the next observation. That is what pretty much a retain statement does. Now let us quickly look into a retain statement and let's try to understand it little bit more. In here, everything being same, what I have done is I have added a retain statement in here followed by my variable name. Now let us quickly run this and then try to understand it. If you see the data set itself, there is nothing changed in here. But if you look into the log, you will find the difference. Now again, understanding log from here is little unclear. So what I will do is I will go ahead and copy and paste the log in here, and I will do the explanation from here. So if you see in here, after using the retain statement, what has happened is, as you can see, for the first iteration, the value is missing. And then after, after the end of the first iteration, that is after our input statement, it has read the observation, and you can see in here. Instead of going to missing, you can see this value being retained. So this value was not retained before, but it is retained in here. Once the value has been retained, in the second iteration, the input statement reads this observation, and this observation is a missing value. It is missing. This value is retained to next observation. That is why you have a missing value for third iteration, but this is a retained value, and this again reads this particular iteration, and then you can see that that particular value is there. Fourth iteration, which starts again, it doesn't start with a missing value, but it is retained in here. So beginning of every iteration, this retain is helping us to retain the value. But when you see your output data, you are sometimes very interested to retain the value itself, but it is not doing that. It is just retaining for the very beginning of iteration, but it is not going to retain. Why is this happening? The reason is pretty simple why it is happening. So to understand it, let's little bit focus more on this. So in here, when the value is retained, that is for our second iteration, you can see it has been retained. What has happened is, even though this value is retained, you have an input statement that reads this missing value. So it overwrites the retained value. So whenever you want to do a retain, you can't do on the same variable, because if you are trying to do that, what you are going to do is you are going to read this value. The retained value here, you can see in the second iteration, was overwritten by this input statement reading this missing value. To avoid this, what we generally do is we create a new variable and we use the retain statement on the new variable. And we also read only those values we want, so that it will not overwrite. Let me explain this through an example in here. So in here, what I am doing is I am using a retain variable, and then the variable I am saying visit underscore dt1. Here visit underscore dt1 is a new variable. That is the important point to remember. And also I have modified my code little bit. Here I'm also adding an if statement. I'm saying if visit date not equal to missing, then visit underscore dt1 equal to visit underscore dt. By doing this, what I am saying in here is I want the visit underscore dt1 value to capture visit underscore dt value when it is not missing. Means I want visit underscore dt1 value to have this value and this value. This also means that I want to read visit underscore dt value only when it is not missing, and I don't want to read when the value is missing. Now let us quickly run this piece of code and see our results. In the results we can see that we have two variables. The first one is visit underscore dt1 and the second one is visit underscore dt. And visit underscore dt1, you can see that we have exactly what we want. We wanted a new variable and we wanted the value to be retained like what we have in visit underscore dt. So it is pretty much similar to what is in visit underscore dt, but when the value is missing, we have retained in here, and this is very useful. Now that we have a new variable visit underscore dt1, what simply we can do is we can drop this variable visit underscore dt and we can rename this variable. This is one simple way of doing things. And now we have visit underscore dt variable wherein we have a retained value when there was a missing value. Now we have achieved our goal. But this is not the only way to do. I mean by dropping this variable and renaming this variable. There are many ways to do. One of the way I will show you. But how this works, that is important to know. And we can know only this by looking into the log in here. And I have pasted that log in here to make it little bit simpler. Now let me also reduce a little bit space so that we can understand this more better. Now let us try to understand. Now I'm starting with the first iteration. With the put statement in here, both my variables visit underscore dt1 and visit underscore dt will have missing values because this is the first iteration and nothing has been read yet. After input statement visit underscore dt, it reads this particular observation, that is 07 Jan 2022, and that's what you can see in here. Visit underscore dt becomes 07 Jan 2022, and as we have an if statement wherein we are saying if visit underscore dt not equal to missing, then visit underscore dt1 equal to visit underscore dt. As this is a non-missing value, it is copied in here. This completes our iteration and this observation is written to our dataset. And now starts the second iteration. During the second iteration, what happens is this put statement puts the variables into the log. The visit date will have a missing value as we have seen earlier, but as we have asked visit underscore dt1 the value to be retained, it retains this 07 Jan 2022. And then once the input statement is read again, what happens is here we have a missing value. This missing value is written for visit date. But the important point to remember here is here we have an if statement. We are telling if visit date not equal to missing, then only take the value from visit underscore dt. What we are doing in here is we are not having any condition to read and write. We are not copying this value in here so that it is overwritten. We are doing smartly by writing a condition wherein we are saying that please read only when the value is non-missing, because this is a missing value. It is not going to read for visit underscore dt1, so the same value is retained. This is the most important point to remember. And then this is written to our dataset. Now the second iteration is done. Now the third iteration starts. In the third iteration, because we have a retain, this value is further retained, whereas in the case of visit underscore dt it goes to missing. And now what happens is here we have a logic saying that if visit date not equal to missing, then visit underscore dt1 equal to visit underscore dt. Even though we have retained this value, the visit underscore dt1 captures this visit underscore dt value of 13 Jan 2022 and it overwrites it in the third iteration. And then it writes to our data set and the fourth iteration starts, and then the fourth iteration again this value is retained, whereas in the case of visit underscore dt it is missing. As there are no more records to read, this data step stops. Now one important point to remember here is if we look into the step above, here also we have retain but on the same variable. What is happening is even though it retains the value, When you are reading with another value, it overrides that value. In this case, what we have done is we have returned a new variable and we have not read anything for that particular observation, so it kind of retains over. In here we have created new variable and achieved what we want to see, but we want to see the change in visit underscore dt. So what we can do for that? Here I have very similar code of what I have shown you earlier with a very small change. Here again I have an if statement wherein I am saying if visit dt not equal to missing, then visit underscore dt1 equal to visit underscore dt. So we are taking care of visit underscore dt1, and we are saying that an else statement in here, and in the else I am saying else visit underscore dt equal to visit underscore dt1. That is, when visit underscore dt is missing, when we say else means when visit date equal to missing, then pick the value from here. That is, if you look into the output data, I am saying in here visit date to capture the value of this one when it is missing. So this visit date becomes 07 Jan 2022. So I'm kind of picking the value from here and overwriting in here. So this becomes 07 Jan 2022, and I no longer need this particular variable, so I can drop this, and that is what I am doing in here, and I am saying in here drop visit underscore dt1. Now let us quickly run our code and see our result. So now we have our visit underscore dt with the retained value when it was missing. Now let us look into the same example and try to understand the functioning of retain even more better. Everything being same, here what I'm doing is I'm changing once if statement in here. I'm saying if underscore and underscore equal to 1, then visit underscore dt1 equal to visit underscore dt. And you can see that I have retained visit underscore dt1. So what it does is visit underscore dt1 reads this particular observation when my iteration is equal to 1, and then it retains all through. And as I'm not reading any other row, it doesn't override my retain values. So to understand the retain statement, you need to understand that always retain statement always retains the value from one iteration to another. This program illustrates this concept even more better. Like what I have shown you in here, just I am reading once and retaining that value. Now let us quickly run this code. And you can see in here that this one observation which I have copied from here and then I have told to retain, it has retained in visit underscore dt1. Now I would like to tell a couple of things before finishing this topic. I was heavily inspired by one paper with the help of which I was able to make this presentation. And I have made videos on data step iteration also. Please have a look into that. Regarding both of these, I will give the link in the description below. That's all for this topic. If you like this topic, please give it a thumbs up, share, subscribe. Thank you.